The Atari video game E.T the Extraterrestrial, often labeled as one of the worst games ever made, stands out not just for its poor design, but for its staggering impact on an entire industry. But how could a single game contribute to the near collapse of the gaming world in the early 1980s? This video dives into the complex story behind E.T. and its infamous role in shaping the fate of video games. To understand the downfall associated with E.T., we need to start by looking at the rapid rise of the gaming industry during the late 1970s and early 1980s. By this time, Atari had already established itself as a pioneering force, with hits like Pong and Asteroids sparking public excitement and helping shape the very concept of home entertainment. Arcades were thriving, and Atari's home consoles were transforming family rooms everywhere, turning video gaming into a booming phenomenon that crossed age and social boundaries. In 1980, Atari was at the pinnacle of success, dominating the industry and capturing nearly 80% of the video game market. As public interest in home entertainment continued to skyrocket, the company faced increasing pressure to deliver a steady stream of new, high-quality titles. Consumers and investors had high expectations, and Atari, eager to maintain its market dominance, aggressively sought to expand its catalog of games. The growing demand for games pushed Atari into uncharted territory, making ambitious decisions that would soon come back to haunt them. The company's business model centered on quantity over quality, and as more developers jumped into the industry, the market was rapidly saturating. At this pivotal point, Atari made the decision to capitalize on the success of E.T the Extraterrestrial, hoping to replicate its success on the big screen with a quick and profitable game release. With E.T. soaring as a blockbuster hit in 1982, Atari saw an opportunity for a lucrative partnership. The company purchased the game rights to E.T. for a record-breaking $25 million, convinced that this beloved alien could boost their holiday sales. However, there was one major catch. E.T. had to be designed, developed, and shipped within a mere 5 weeks to meet the Christmas deadline. This timeline was unheard of for a video game, as most titles required several months to a year to develop. Atari assigned the project to Howard Scott Warshaw, a talented developer known for previous successes like Yar's Revenge. Warshaw faced immense pressure to create a product that could capture the movie's charm while also delivering a satisfying gaming experience. Despite the tight deadline, Warshaw accepted the challenge and began working around the clock. But the constraints forced him to cut corners, leading to design choices that, although ambitious, lacked refinement. The immense pressure and ambitious timeline were red flags from the beginning, setting the stage for a series of compromises that would soon prove disastrous. The 5-week rush would result in a game that Atari hoped would become a hit, but would ultimately go down as one of its greatest miscalculations. The rushed development of E.T. resulted in a game with major design flaws that left players frustrated and disillusioned. The game's premise, while simple, suffered from confusing mechanics and repetitive gameplay that didn't resonate with audiences. Players controlled E.T. as he tried to collect pieces of a telephone to call home, navigating a maze-like world riddled with pitfalls. However, the game's execution made this simple mission a nightmare. One of the main issues was the frequent, seemingly unavoidable holes in the ground. Players would fall into these pits repeatedly, forced to struggle to escape over and over again. This cycle created a frustrating experience that lacked the enjoyment and challenge players expected. The graphics, while acceptable by Atari's standards, felt inadequate for a game with such high expectations. The limited color palette and blocky designs made it difficult to tell one screen from the next, and the few audio effects were repetitive and uninspired. To make matters worse, the game lacked intuitive feedback for players, resulting in a clunky and confusing experience. Unlike other popular titles of the time, E.T. failed to engage players with clear objectives and satisfying progression. Furthermore, the absence of a clear storyline in E.T. stood in stark contrast to the movie's emotional depth. The rushed timeline meant that Warshaw had to bypass essential elements that might have connected players to the beloved character. As a result, what could have been an immersive, story-driven experience fell flat, leaving both children and parents feeling unsatisfied. These design issues, combined with a lack of polish, led players to abandon E.T. shortly after starting. The overwhelmingly negative feedback was quick and harsh, sealing the game's fate as a colossal failure. When E.T launched in December 1982, Atari had high hopes, producing millions of copies and anticipating an eager market. However, the game was met with swift backlash from players and critics alike. Disappointment quickly turned to outrage as gamers found themselves facing the game's repetitive, confusing mechanics. Parents who had purchased E.T as a holiday gift soon realized it wasn't delivering the excitement their children had expected, and many players returned the game within days of buying it. The scale of Atari's expectations only worsened the fallout. Having manufactured far more cartridges than usual in anticipation of record sales, Atari was left with warehouses filled with unsold and returned E.T copies. This overproduction, paired with the swift rejection from consumers, dealt a financial blow that the company hadn't anticipated. Even the extensive marketing campaign couldn't salvage its reputation, as word of mouth spread about the game's poor quality. The backlash was so intense that the game rapidly became a symbol of failure in the industry, and Atari found itself facing public embarrassment. With mountains of unwanted cartridges and a damaged reputation, E.T wasn't just a failed game. It was a disaster that brought a harsh spotlight to the industry's underlying problems. By 1983, the video game industry was in a state of crisis, and E.T was one of the primary symbols of its decline. Atari's massive losses from E.T were a tipping point, but they were only part of a larger issue: oversaturation and loss of consumer trust. In an attempt to capitalize on gaming's popularity, companies had flooded the market with poorly made games, many of which felt like rushed cash grabs. Gamers, faced with an overwhelming selection of low-quality titles, began to lose confidence in the entire industry. For Atari, the financial impact of E.T was staggering. The company had spent millions on marketing, licensing, and production, only to see most of its investment result in unsold cartridges. This financial hit contributed to a $536 million loss for Atari in 1983, a number that sent shockwaves through the gaming world. Atari's strategy of mass-producing and oversaturating the market had backfired spectacularly, with E.T serving as the most visible failure. In a dramatic and almost surreal twist, Atari decided to rid itself of its unsold E.T cartridges in a way that would become a notorious legend. In 1983, the company quietly arranged for millions of unsold E.T games, along with other inventory, to be buried in a landfill in Alamogordo, New Mexico. This act was both a practical response to overwhelming inventory and a symbolic moment that came to represent the collapse of an industry plagued by missteps. For years, the burial of E.T was dismissed as an urban myth until 2014, when a documentary team uncovered the site and unearthed the cartridges, proving the legend to be true. The discovery rekindled interest in the story, reminding everyone of how Atari's moment of ambition ended in literal and figurative burial. This event cemented E.T.'s place in history as a symbol of the 1983 crash and the industry's need for reform. The story of E.T is more than just a tale of a failed game. It's a crucial chapter in the history of video games. What began as a rushed attempt to cash in on a Hollywood blockbuster ended up exposing serious flaws within the industry, leading to a crisis that reshaped gaming forever. Ironically, the game's failure paved the way for the gaming standards and innovations we enjoy today. In this way, E.T serves as a reminder that setbacks, no matter how monumental, can often be the catalyst for positive, transformative change. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of gaming's most notorious failures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think a similar industry shakeup could happen today? Check out our other videos exploring pivotal moments in gaming history, and stay tuned for more content.